Hi, Nursing 6113, Dr. Kim Paxton here. This week we're doing Public Health Policy and Systems, Module 9, week number 7. This particular module is one that can cause people to become very much engaged in conversation, and we're asking that as you do engage in your discussions this week in relationship to health policy, that you remember to use a professional voice, and that not all members of your discussion teams may have the same opinion as you with respect to the discussion questions. So let's see what we're going to be doing this week. This week your objectives are going to be developing an understanding of some of the legislation and political underpinnings that are associated with health promotion and related clinical work and clinical practice. You're going to learn to understand key facets of the Affordable Care Act, which is ACA, and how they interrelate into health promotion and clinical work today. Now, as we progress forward with legislation, with the new administration that's in government office, what we are seeing for the Affordable Care Act could very well be changing in the very near future. But presently, we still have the Affordable Care Act that has not been repealed or replaced, so we do need to learn about that and understand that. Not all aspects of the Affordable Care Act are going to be removed with the new legislation that is being proposed. And the final aspect that we're hoping you'll take away from this week's learnings is the strengths and limitations of the Affordable Care Act in relationship to health promotion and prevention. Now, as you're looking at this third one, for the strengths and limitations, as you listen and hear and learn about the things that are currently occurring legislation-wise for reform, think about how those could affect health promotion and prevention. Your readings this week is Chapter 3, and as it states in your instructions, this one is a little bit on the heavy side. There's a lot of information here. I also would encourage you to take a look at what you're finding online. So just look at Healthcare Reform 2017 and see what you're seeing. A lot of what's going on out there right now is very political, and there's a lot of emphasis on removal of some of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act that are strongly related to the health promotion and prevention track. We've got one specific paper we're asking you to read by Cohen Ceballos. Now, this particular paper you will be reflecting upon in your discussion, so you really need to read this one. And then we have two others for you to look at. One of them is the American Public Health Association's fact sheet on the Affordable Care Act, and then NACO. We're asking you to choose one of these to look at very intently and the other just to skim over. You will need to look at one or the other of these secondary to having to discuss them in your discussion with a colleague. This week, your learning activities or your discussion activity is that you're going to be summarizing some findings that you have come across that you feel are important to you. So first, you're going to go ahead and make a comment on implications of the Affordable Care Act in relationship to a patient population that you work most closely with, or one that you have a strong passion to. The next thing is you're going to pull forward, maybe even in a bullet point aspect, 3 interesting insights that you gain from reading the chapter this week. Now, as you're reading this chapter this week in chapter number 3, the first part is interesting, but as you start getting into it, you're really going to gain a better understanding of the delivery systems, so health insurance companies, how the federal government interplays in, what is Medicare, what is Medicaid, how does it work, what is the influence on policy of health and insurance companies, how do pharmaceutical companies come into play with this. Then you're going to get a little bit deeper into the chapter, and now it really starts getting very interesting and quite exciting from my point of view. When you start getting deeper into the aspects of financing healthcare, as you begin looking at the charts that are there and the graphs, take a really close look at how the United States compares to the rest of the world. And we have some of the best care delivery systems and most profoundly intelligent and forward-thinking care processes, but yet our costs are astronomical. Why? Why is it so expensive to get health care here in the United States versus going to another country? As you move forward through Chapter 3 and you continue on, you'll find more information about government's assistance, about how the elderly population interplay in, those with disabilities interplays in, and how that affects the pay lot. You're also going to see information there related to managed care and private insurance in relationship to how they interplay into the political arena. So really take a good look at this chapter. It really helps explain where we are today and why, and how it affects your practice in the future. I want to review the clinical guidelines paper that you have due next week. First, as you open this section up in your module, there is a highlighted area that will link you right to very full instructions and the rubric for this writing assignment. Please make sure you're looking at the rubric to see how you will be graded on this assignment. You will need to pick a topic that has an associated guideline and that you're able to research in the literature. From that literature and from the guideline, you'll discuss the strengths and the limitations of the guidelines, and if there are any limitations, you'll address them in your literature. If it's a really strong guideline, you're going to say it's strong, and then you need to support it and why it's strong with a citation from another literary source. If you have a limitation, you'll have to do that same thing. You can include an appendix with a table on it if you choose to. It is not mandatory for you to do this. You will need to use correct APA formatting if you do include a table. Now, tables in APA formatting can be a little bit complex, so make sure you are using your book or an online resource to help you make sure you cite those appropriately. You must use headings for this paper as outlined in the instructions of the paper. Now, the introduction is your very first thing that you'll put on your page after the title. Please make sure you're putting the title of this paper on the first page where the body of the paper starts. After the title, you put the words introduction. Now, in your introduction, this is a brief overview of the health issue or the problem. Within this, we want you to briefly cite the 2020 goals that could be associated with this, or the scope of the incidence or prevalence of whatever the problem is or the issue is that your guideline is addressing. The next section is your clinical guidelines section. Now, this is where the meat of the paper is. Open this section up by talking about how did you go about researching and finding your guideline in the literature. So if you used Google Scholar or if you used Ovid, what did you do and what were the bullion terms that you used to find this? Then you need to talk about the guideline or guidelines that you found, the organizations in which they came from, and what the literature is saying about these guidelines. Remember, in here is where you'll talk about your limitations and your strengths. Make sure you're using correct citation. Your final heading will be your clinical recommendations. And this is your own advanced practice and population interest that you're going to talk about. So if I'm talking about geriatric patients and I'm looking at immunizations, I want to reflect upon how those clinical recommendations in those guidelines can actually benefit my population that I have of interest. Make sure you keep this brief but to the point, and that you're addressing the recommendation and how it can help that population. The final piece I want to talk to you about is APA formatting. As Scott and I have been going over the last papers that were just turned in, we noticed that we have some repeated concerns with APA coming forward. So I decided to go ahead and talk to you about them as I gave you this week's overview. Make sure that you look at your 6th edition APA book to make sure you've got the correct formatting. Some of the consistent errors that we're seeing are on the title page with the running head. There's a very specific way it has to be written, and the actual running head words themselves, like this is Kim's paper, there is a set number of characters that you can only use. You can't go over X amount. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that amount is because I want you to go look at the book. For the citations, we noticed that there were problems with first citing and second citing by the same authors, and that you're not following correct APA format. We're seeing this specifically when there are 3 or more authors. Remember that when you get to 6 or more authors, there's a different way of citing this than you normally would, so you really need to look at that APA book to make sure you're citing this correctly. We also noted that there was some inconsistency with relationship to the formatting in APA and websites that you use, so make sure that you are getting those correct too. With respect to the reference page, remember that the word reference needs to be centered in the center of the page, and that the reference page is on its own page, does not follow after the body of the paper. Please make sure that you're looking to make sure that you have your spacing correct and that you have the indentations correct. We found that to be an issue, that students were not consistent in making their reference pages per APA format. There are online resources that you can use. There's actually interactive APA sites that you can use, but we're really asking you to please make sure that you take the time to check your formatting before you turn your final copy in. We will be taking points off for APA errors in this paper. If you have any questions, make sure you're emailing us. You guys have a great week.